Meet the Robinsons is that movie from your childhood that nobody talks about. Outside of video essays like the one you're watching right now, or more likely a Shafferless Productions video explaining how it's an underrated gem, it very likely flew under the radar for you if you aren't familiar with Disney's extensive work. But don't feel too bad, I only know about it because I watched it basically on repeat when I was just a little baby boy with no taxes to pay. This movie came out in 2007, and despite having a generally positive reception, it was a box office bomb, grossing $169 million with a budget of $150 million. That seems pretty out of character for a Pixar movie. Huh? Was it? Oh, it's not a Pixar movie. Oh. I have just been informed that Meet the Robinsons was not produced by Pixar. It was instead made by Walt Disney Animation Studios. You know, Walt Disney Animation Studios. Okay. I don't know if this is just a me thing, but when I hear the words Disney animated movie released after the year 2000, I think of Pixar movies. Even though Pixar and Disney are different studios, we all know that Pixar is owned by Disney, but it's not Disney. Pop quiz. Which of these three movies was made by Pixar? Frozen, Planes, or Zootopia? If you said Planes, you'd be incorrect. That movie was made by Disney Toon Studios. And if you said Moana, 1, that wasn't one of the options, and 2, that was made by Disney. They're all made by Disney. What the f*** is wrong with you? Yes, Frozen, Zootopia, and Moana were all produced by Walt Disney Animation. Now, if your reaction to that information was, wow, these look like they were made by Pixar, the animation looks so good, you seem to have forgotten what movie I'm talking about. Yes, by the mid-2010s, Walt Disney Animation Studios had achieved a standard of quality with their CG animated films. But remember that they were best known for their 2D animation. They had to develop their 3D animating skills after Pixar had already set the bar. So Meet the Robinsons released in 2007. You know what Pixar released in 2007? Ratatouille. Before that, Cars in 2006. You know what Walt Disney Animation released in 2005? Chicken F***ing Little. You wanna know the worst part? Ratatouille, Meet the Robinsons, and Chicken Little were all made on the same budget. And Chicken Little made twice as much as Meet the Robinsons at the box office, which is frankly just insulting. Hopefully it's clear by now that this era of Disney animation was one of intense growing pains. In my opinion, their first CG animated movie that looked any good was Tangled, which came out in 2010. You take one look at Meet the Robinsons, and there's almost this uncanny valley effect with the characters. Not necessarily in a scary way, but the models feel a little off. I don't think this movie looks awful, but it definitely shows its age. This was before Disney really knew what they were doing when it came to animating human models. But did child me care about the visuals? God, no. Like I said, I watched this movie on repeat when I was young. I loved it. I still love it. And I am definitely biased when I say that this movie is incredibly charming and heartfelt. The humor is snappy and not nearly as lowbrow as you would expect from a movie from the 2010s that looks like this. It has its flaws. It has its flaws, no doubt. On top of everything else, the movie experienced drastic changes in the middle of production, with more than half of the original film being outright scrapped and rewritten. Nevertheless, for me, this movie is pure childhood nostalgia. If you haven't seen Meet the Robinsons, stop watching this video and watch it right now. Seriously, please just watch it. It's an enjoyable experience. I know that most people watching this who haven't seen the movie will just continue anyway because it's easier to have a guy explain it to you than watch it yourself. Trust me, I get it. Watching movies is a commitment of time and attention. Nevertheless, here is your official spoiler warning.
Sarsaparilla, my teeth are back! Ring-a-ding-ding.
Meet the Robinsons is about a young boy genius named Louis, who has been living in an orphanage his entire life after his birth mother left him on the doorstep when he was a baby. Now he's 12 years old, and despite having adoption interviews with over 100 couples, he has never been adopted. His lack of being a quote-unquote typical kid with typical interests makes him stand out, in a bad way. So he decides to go and find his birth mom, but he doesn't actually know what she looks like and only has one memory of her from when he was left at the orphanage. But he is dead set on never being rejected again, and he works to invent a device that can scan his brain to find the lost memory of his mom. After several late nights of work and keeping his roommate up, he finishes the device, calling it the memory scanner, just in time to bring it to his school's science fair. At the science fair, Louis meets a young boy named Wilbur, who claims that he is a time-traveling cop from the future sent back in time to catch a man wearing a bowler hat. He says the bowler hat guy stole a time machine and went back to the day of Louis's science fair to mess with him or something. Lewis thinks Wilbur is full of baloney, but then we just see the actual bowler hat guy hiding in the shadows. And his bowler hat is actually a robot, which he sends to sabotage Lewis's memory scanner. The memory scanner breaks and it causes a butterfly effect of chaos in the gym. A defeated Lewis runs out, and we see the bowler hat guy take the memory scanner for himself. Wilbur tries to convince Lewis to fix his memory scanner, but Lewis still doesn't trust that he's from the future. Wilbur convinces him by pushing him off a building onto a camouflage time machine. And so Wilbur takes Lewis to the distant year of 2037, where all of civilization is confined to a single city surrounded by miles of astroturf, and there's only white people here. Lewis is wowed by the future, but realizes that instead of fixing his memory scanner, he can just use the time machine to see his mom in person. However, Wilbur insists that Lewis fix the memory scanner, and the two boys get into an argument, leading them to crash the time machine. Wilbur believes that Lewis can apparently fix a time machine, and Lewis says that he'll only do it if Wilbur takes him to see his mom afterward. So, they go to Wilbur's garage, and Lewis finally gets to meet them. After meeting Wilbur's wacky family, Lewis realizes that he feels like he has more of a family here than he ever did at home. And over the course of a single day, the Robinsons decide that they would love to have Lewis as a part of their family. But then Wilbur reveals that Lewis is not from their time, and the Robinsons immediately tell Lewis that he can't stay there. Lewis also finds out that Wilbur was never actually going to uphold his end of the deal to take Lewis to see his mom, so he runs away upset and angry. He runs into Bowler Hat Guy, who says that if Lewis fixes the memory scanner, he'll carry out the promise that Wilbur never kept. And then, through a lot of expositional dialogue, Bowler Hat Guy reveals that 1. Lewis is, or at least will go on to be, Wilbur's father. 2. Bowler Hat Guy is the adult version of Goob, Lewis's roommate who he kept awake, who I never mentioned until now because I don't know how to write a script. Bowler Hat Guy explains that after being kept awake by Lewis working on the memory scanner, he was sleep deprived during his Little League baseball game, and ended up missing the game-winning catch because he dozed off. That part probably isn't that hard to figure out on your own, but Lewis being Wilbur's dad is a nice little twist that ties a handful of things together. It's not earth-shattering, but I don't think it's really supposed to be. It's just oh wait, these specific lines and character choices make a lot more sense now. Anyway, I may have forgotten to mention that this entire time, Bowler Hat Guy has been doing his own thing in the present. The past. That time that Lewis is from. 2007, that's it. After stealing the memory scanner from the gym, he brought it to InventCo to have it patented by the CEO of the company, but failed because he had no idea what the fuck the device did. After that, he went back to the future to capture Lewis and have him both fix it and explain how it works. But here comes a real twist. Doris, the robot that turns Guy into Bowler Hat Guy, was one of Lewis's future failed inventions called the Helping Hat. She was meant to be an accessory that could offer an extra set of hands to help with self-grooming or... okay, well that's really all we see. But Doris ended up controlling the mind of whoever wore her, leading future Lewis to scrap the project. But Doris escaped, and just like Bowler Hat Guy, had a vendetta against Lewis. So, after a full 3-course meal of plot twists with just enough room for dessert, Bowler Hat Guy and Doris go back to Lewis's present and not only successfully patent the memory scanner, but also the helping hats. Lewis is now stuck in the future, and then suddenly everything around him morphs into a dark, depressing, and hat-themed future. That's right, Doris took over the world. She was the true mastermind, as Bowler Hat Guy had no idea that this was her plan all along. So after an, honestly, really f***ing cool chase sequence, Lewis fixes the time machine and goes back in time to interrupt Bowler Hat Guy just as he's signing the contract. Lewis says that Doris was using him all along, and then, knowing his future self would invent Doris, promises then and there to never invent her. And then everything goes back to normal. And I'm actually going to leave it there, because I do not want to spoil the ending scenes. They really are something that should just be experienced through watching the movie, or just finding clips of it online. I don't know, man, you do you. Whoa, cool fades of black thing to indicate a transition in the middle of the video, whoa. So this would normally be the part of the video where I go more in depth and explain the core themes and ideas presented in the movie. But unfortunately I can't do that, because this movie is not shy about doing it for me. I spent an unhealthy amount of time trying to explain this next section properly, because this movie is obvious in its message about the future and how you should always keep moving forward, but for the life of me, I cannot tell if this is done on purpose or not. You know, throughout the movie, you have little bits of dialogue strewn about that aren't super in your face.
You have got to get out of the past and look to the future.
And then you have the entire Robinson family explaining to Lewis / the audience that failure is good. You learn from failure. This is the message of the movie.
You failed!
And it was awesome.
Eventually, I had to throw in the towel and just accept the fact that this is a movie made for kids, so spoon-feeding the message helps deliver it to the target audience. There probably isn't a singular reason behind it, but lord did I try to find one. Anyway, Meet the Robinsons' central theme of always looking ahead is a value famously held by Walt Disney himself. I mean, the phrase "keep moving forward" is just ripped straight from a larger quote from Disney, and the movie literally shows that quote to you right before the end credits. Also, the future city we see Lewis and Wilbur travel to, you know, the one with only white people, is named Todayland, which is undoubtedly a play on Walt Disney's Tomorrowland, an area found in many Disney theme parks and a really mediocre movie starring George Clooney. Now, Lewis as a character is driven by the will to improve the world using technology. When he has a goal in mind, he will not stop until he accomplishes it, as we see both when he's making the memory scanner and from Wilbur's story about his dad building the time machine, where he wakes up in the middle of the night, imagines a time machine, and just does not stop until he builds it. Now, there is a term, funnily enough, that perfectly describes this pattern of thinking: the growth mindset. Now, growth mindset is a sort of buzzword used in a lot of different contexts, from psychology to business to general personal growth, but here is a basic definition. Having a growth mindset means believing that you can realistically achieve anything with enough time, work, and effort, and you aren't afraid to face challenges head on. Now, because Meet the Robinsons is a Disney movie, Lewis as the protagonist gets a happy ending and goes on to become an incredibly successful inventor with a hot wife. But what about Bowler Hat Guy? He's the main antagonist for the majority of the film, and he's not shy of letting you know it. But his entire motivation for acting evil is that he wants revenge against Lewis for making him stay up all night as he worked on the memory scanner, thus causing him to miss the winning catch of his Little League baseball game. He just wants to ruin Lewis's life, and that's it. The only reason the future turns into an apocalypse is because that was Doris's plan. Bowler Hat Guy himself says that he didn't want this to happen. He only wanted to hurt Lewis. Now, I mentioned growth mindset earlier, but there is a separate term that perfectly describes Bowler Hat Guy's behavior: a fixed mindset. A fixed mindset is just the opposite of a growth mindset. Having a fixed mindset generally means that you see your own abilities and intelligence as something that is unchanging. It's the belief that because you're not a naturally gifted piano player, you'll never be good at playing piano. What's interesting about Bowler Hat Guy is that he didn't always have this mindset, at least not to the level of becoming evil. It's not until Lewis makes him stay up and thus miss the winning catch that he becomes self-absorbed and spiteful. When Bowler Hat Guy goes back into his old room to find Lewis, he instead finds his younger self, bruised up and holding a stake after getting beat up by his team for making them lose. The young Goob says that he feels upset, but that people are telling him to move on, and he almost agrees with them, until...
No! Everyone will tell you to let it go and move on, but don't. Let it fester and boil inside of you. Take these feelings and lock them away. Heed my words, Goob. Don't let it go.
Bowler Hat Guy's origin story is what's known as a self-fulfilling prophecy. For those who aren't familiar, a self-fulfilling prophecy is the idea that if you believe something bad will happen, you then behave as if you are certain that bad thing is going to happen, which then actually causes a bad thing to happen. That's confusing. Here's an example. Say I have a big exam coming up. It's worth 100% of my grade, and I have a week to study. But instead of studying, I get overwhelmed and think to myself, there is no way I can study all of this before the exam. I am going to fail. Because of this mindset, I decide that there's no point in studying because I'm convinced I'm going to fail anyway, no matter how much effort I put in. Thus, because I didn't bother even trying to study, I guaranteed that I was going to fail the exam. A self-fulfilling prophecy can apply to positive situations, but it's typically used to refer to negative mindsets causing negative behavior and thus worsening the mindset in a sort of endless loop. Bowler Hat Guy's prophecy is presented in a really interesting way, as it's implied that he became consumed with wanting revenge as a child after his future self told him that he should never let things go. We then see his younger self taking his anger out during adoption interviews, ensuring that he would never be adopted.
If I hadn't fallen asleep, I would have caught the ball, and we would have won. Do you understand?
He actively shuts out anybody who would potentially care about him and convinces himself that he was an outcast, which, in turn, made him into an outcast.
Hey, Goop, what's up? Cool binder.
Hey, Goop, wanna come over to my house today?
They all hated me.
He spends decades in the orphanage, even after it closed down. doing absolutely nothing but letting his spite fester more and more instead of moving on with his life. He grew older, but he didn't really grow up. This is why, as an adult, he exhibits so much childlike behavior. His idea of a grand plan to enact his revenge on Lewis amounted to just egging his house. Even his whole idea of what it means to be evil sounds like what you would get if you asked a child to describe a villainous character. Dark clothes, an evil laugh, grand entrances, plotting to turn Lewis into a duck. Now, when you compare Lewis and Bowler Hat Guy as characters, you find that despite being polar opposites, they have one major commonality. They are both incredibly motivated and will stop at nothing to achieve their goals. Obviously, we don't want our past grievances to define who we are because we are complex individuals greater than the sum of our parts. But by dwelling on these negative events from our past, they begin to change how we think, act, and feel. This is what Bowler Hat Guy did, engaging in a fruitless pursuit of revenge and simply refusing to move on. What's interesting to me is that the movie doesn't end with Bowler Hat Guy going to jail or learning to become good. He just runs off, away from Lewis as he tries to reach out to him as a friend. And this reaction makes sense when you consider that he's devoted his whole life to getting back at Lewis. He can't just make amends like that, he still hasn't achieved his goal. Letting go or apologizing to Lewis would mean admitting to himself that he was wrong. And when you've dedicated 30 years of your life to nothing but revenge, do you think it would be so easy to just come to terms with the idea that you've wasted your life? Psychology tells us that humans do not always respond well when people try to change their mind, and that holds especially true to beliefs that we've held for a long time. So in a way, it's more realistic for Bowler Hat Guy to not have some sort of redemption arc. He may not have been the real villain, but he lived his whole life wanting to be one. I think Bowler Hat Guy's story is more of a cautionary tale. Yes, he's the villain, technically, but he's not gone. He's not dead, he's not in jail, he didn't turn good. He just ran off into the city made by the person that he hates the most. I think if Disney were to ever make a sequel to Meet the Robinsons, and I really hope they don't, but if they did, and Bowler Hat Guy was involved in any capacity, I feel like we would see him try to escape to a time period that doesn't have Lewis. He would go much further into the past or future and try to live his own life. Maybe the conflict would be he causes time anomalies by interfering with the distant past. I don't know, that's not important. The point is, I feel like he would go to a time period that didn't have the person he's wasted his life over. Because as long as Lewis is still around and successful, Bowler Hat Guy will always feel like he needs to complete his goal. But if he goes to the past before Lewis is born and can create an entire futuristic utopia in his image, maybe he could feel free. Free to live the rest of his life as he so wishes. But man, I really hope they don't make that sequel. I really like the self-contained story that exists in these 90 minutes. It's fun, it's silly, it's goofy, it doesn't take itself too seriously. It's without question one of my favorite childhood movies. It has its problems, what movie doesn't? And you could spend like an hour picking apart all the different time travel plot holes because we as a society can't agree on a single definitive version of time travel for any piece of media we come up with. But how about, fuck you, it's a kid's movie, I'm done. Thank you for watching.